I don't do this often because I'm literally always right. I've never been wrong about anything, ever. My apartment smells of rich mahogany and I have many other bound books. People know me, okay? But before we get to today's topic, oh god, I'm gonna throw up saying this. I need to issue a retraction. I made a mistake in my discussion about the campaign map yesterday, and I almost deleted my channel in shame. No, honestly, I don't feel too bad about it because it wasn't very obvious. In fact, the way Creative Assembly oriented the text and layout for the CATHAY reveal made it very confusing. I'm not sure if that was the intention, but it made me read the chart wrong. I was reading it wrong the entire time. Don't show up now in the comments saying you knew what was up. I got maybe 3 comments overall out of 900 that pointed out the problem. And I know you guys, you would have been all over me if you had noticed that I was wrong. I thought that the map was running west to east, with the words on the page running left to right, just like you'd see in a normal upright chart, which would mean Darklands on the left, Mountains of Morn in the middle, CATHAY on the right, Chaos Wastes in the north. Standard map of the Warhammer world: up is north, right is east, left is west, down is south. I mean, I noticed a few weird things about the map that we saw. That the Mountains of Morn were looking very skinny, which is kind of embarrassing for the big chungus ogres who live there, and they were very upset about it, but I kind of just chalked it all up to the standard warping and distortion we've come to expect. What I missed was, before the advisor moves the letter to the left to reveal CATHAY, for a split second, the ancient giant lands are revealed, just sitting there at the bottom of the page. And immediately, if I had noticed that, I would have realized the actual orientation of Warhammer 3's campaign map, because the ancient giant lands are a massive mountain range east of the Mountains of Morn, sandwiched between CATHAY and the Great Maw on one side, and the Ogre Kingdoms on the other. This was the site of the infamous War in the Sky, when a race of intelligent, enormous precursors to the dumbass giants of modern day were driven to extinction by the ogres thousands of years ago. But in the reveal, the ancient giant lands look like they are south of CATHAY, which means that most of us were looking at the map all wrong. Basically have to turn the entire thing on its axis, and the picture becomes much more clear. The Darklands and Mountains of Morn are barely even on this page, which explains why a portion of the Great Bastion was running vertically and not horizontally, as it would when staring at a standard north, south, east, west depiction of the Warhammer world. So the northern border of CATHAY, that green line that connects it to the Chaos Wastes, that is the line the Great Bastion is following. The left portion of the map, where I saw the K''D, isn't a CATHAY smithing location in the Darklands, it's almost certainly Cadatha, a blasted plateau in Kurgan lands where the Chaos Gods had a free-for-all to decide which champion had the rights to lead the next great invasion of the old world. And that champion was Tamerken, the favored of Nurgle, and his great plague host when they threw down in the ancient ruins of the fallen city, and he earned the right to rule in glorious ritual combat with the champion of Slaanesh, where his little maggot body just launched itself down that Slaaneshi throat, ripped his chest apart from the inside, and body snatched that hoe. Could be our first hint that Tamerken might be coming sometime later down the line. Don't expect to see him on launch, but maybe afterwards. Now, I don't think any of these fan-created renditions from Jungle Elf or LSM are perfect, but it should give you a much better idea of how to orient yourself and wrap your mind around the layout of the map. But yeah, just to be clear, this is not going to be close to the full size of the overall map. This is just a glimpse of it. The final version will include much of the Chaos Wastes, most of the Darklands, which really aren't appearing here at all, and the Mountains of Morn, all of which barely show up in the official trailer map. It's also important to remember that no matter what, there is going to be some serious warping of Warhammer 3's exclusive campaign map. There is no getting around that as much as we wish otherwise. If you compare the Great Vortex campaign to the actual Warhammer world, it literally doesn't make any sense from a geographical perspective. And even in Mortal Empires, there are tons of little elements that don't accurately reflect the world, like Bretonnia being able to step off their back porch and trip into Ulthuan. There's a massive ocean between them in the lore, but in game, it's not even a full turn sail away. That's okay. We get a huge playing space, maybe the biggest campaign in any game ever, continents that closely resemble the source material, and a ton of detail that makes for a fun, immersive experience. I think it's gonna be alright. So, with that out of the way, retraction completed, on to the Realms of Chaos and the Chaos Wastes, which is closely tied to what we were talking about anyway. I think a big question we all have right now is how the Realms of Chaos are going to be implemented in Total War Warhammer 3. If you asked me a year ago or 2 years ago, I would have said not at all. The Realms of Chaos will not be in the game. We didn't get an underway map for the Dwarfs, Skaven, and Greenskins, and we didn't get a campaign within a campaign for Athelloren, where you're in a situation like you enter the forest, it zooms down, and 15 more settlements appear. Could have been a way to do Athelloren. It's a magical forest that's way bigger than it is on an actual map, but we did not see anything like that in Total Warhammer 2 Mortal Empires. So why would we get a warp bubble that exists outside time and space, much like Athelloren, separate from the Chaos Wastes that only demons can access? Well, if the Steam page and FAQ are anything to go by, they won't be the only ones to access it. And I quote, "On the border between the worlds, two mighty kingdoms stand sentinel, the stern warriors of Kislev and the vast empire of Grand CATHAY. But each is beset by its own trials, and now both have cause to cross the threshold and send their armies into the realms of chaos." Now, normally, I'd say that's just a reference to the Chaos Wastes, that CA just saying CATHAY and Kislev will cross their borders into the north, just like Boris Ursus did in the trailer, and take the fight to the enemy on their own home turf. But just before that line, CA is making a clear distinction between the two, one that is necessary. Far beyond the boundaries of the mortal world and its petty wars, there exists a dimension of pure, malevolent magic, an impossible domain of magic and dark wonder. This is a nightmarescape of desire, hatred, whimsy, and terror. Here, no physical laws apply, save for those enforced by the creatures that live within its bounds. It is a terrible place, incomprehensible to the mortal mind, that whispers promises of power, but to behold it is to be seduced by it, to relinquish your soul to it, to become it. This is the realm of chaos, dwelling place of the dark gods and the demons of chaos. And it's important to note here that the Chaos Wastes and the Realms of Chaos are not even remotely the same thing. They bleed into each other the closer you get to the broken Old One's warp gates at the poles of the planet, but they are not one and the same. The Chaos Wastes are a physical part of the Warhammer world. You can see them on a map. They exist. They are corporeal. There's a lot of janky craziness that goes on up there, things that would seem impossible on the mortal plane, hallucinations and moving cities and storms of raining blood, but it's still there. It's happening. The same cannot be said for the warp, for the actual realms of chaos, which are on their own separate plane of reality, and I think being hinted at in the trailer itself, in that same image on the reveal for CATHAY. Getting a lot of mileage out of that one. So if we take a look at that image one more time, the 8-pointed star is a folder over the top of the CATHAY map reveal. The 8-pointed star, of course, being the symbol of chaos. It might be representing the realms of chaos here as well. When you take a look at it, being separate from the map itself, the first thing I think of is a separate mini-campaign within a campaign. A unique theater of war that is isolated and accessed differently than the rest of Mortal Empires, which is exactly how I think CA should handle it, because these realms are the battlegrounds for the ruinous powers. A gladiator arena where the Neverborn test their mettle and martial skill before those rare opportunities where they mass into cataclysmic invasions that batter the old world and beyond. It's where the armies of Khorne, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and Nurgle spawn their freaks of nature, where the borders of their realms ebb and flow with each new conflict, where millions of hellish voices are snuffed out every single day, only to be replaced by millions more in the void. But the Steam page already has us asking an important question. Should these lands only be accessible to demons? From a lore perspective, I would say yes. The Realms of Chaos are anathema to mortal life. The few living, breathing humans or elves who make it there are quickly gobbled up and ravaged for their souls. And I think of it kind of like the Black Gate of Mordor in Lord of the Rings. Not with 100,000 well-armed, well-equipped soldiers could you plunge into the warp and hope to survive. But from a pure fun perspective, does anything sound more badass than taking an army of polar bears and plunging into the warp to burn down the Garden of Nurgle and ransack the Fortress of Khorne? That sounds pretty damn awesome. And this kind of thing is already being implied by Creative Assembly. Beset by their own trials, now both have cause to cross the threshold and send their armies into the realm of chaos. Sounds like absolute madness, but may very well play an important role in the overall narrative. There is some objective the forces of order must accomplish by entering the warp and fighting with the chaos gods on their own home turf. Not in a capacity where they have a chance to win, per se, but as a stalling action that allows for something important to happen, like what we saw with Frodo and Sam as they took the Precious to Mount Doom, a sacrificial ploy in a final quest battle of sorts to throw back the tides of chaos forever and avert the coming cataclysm. That is the vibe I'm getting, and I find it really interesting. Now, as we know, there are two major rivalries between the Chaos Gods in 8th edition. Khorne the Blood God hates Slaanesh the Dark Prince for his wild pursuit of pleasure, pain, and hedonism, and Tzeentch hates Nurgle because stale entropy and decay is a threat to the rapid, unchecked cell growth that is Big Bird's calling card. The current lore pits those two as the main rivals. It's Slaanesh and Khorne, and Tzeentch and Nurgle, although Khorne also hates Tzeentch because of his reliance on deceit and magic. He hates magic, he hates everyone, he hates everything, he hates going outside, he hates going inside, so he tends to just stand in the doorway like his boy Scarbrand. And these rivalries are a big reason why Chaos Undivided isn't necessarily going to be the main focus in Game 3, even though I do expect that a full Demons roster will be playable. The Realms of Chaos will be your stomping grounds before you swarm the Chaos Wastes, beating up the Aghols, and the Kurgan, and the Hung, and the various barbarian tribes before you break through that shitty wall like the Kool-Aid Man screaming, "Oh yeah!" and start feasting on CATHAY. And the Realms of Chaos are where Creative Assembly are really going to have to flex their creative muscles and bring us something special in terms of visuals, battle maps, and overall playing space. Because as we've already alluded to, these locations don't make sense. They are a nightmarish fever dream of impossibility, a Disneyland for demons, and maybe the best way to introduce them is through the eyes of a mortal who walked these lands and lost his sanity in the process, staring into the very heart of lunacy, depravity, despair, and darkness. As I walked through that vast and maddened landscape, I sought to record my journey. Oh, the hubris of man who tries to map the whims of gods. Each time I turn my eyes to this page, that which greets me is different to my previous viewing. Verily, it remains unchanged while my eyes are upon it, but when I close this book, the continents shift and flow, and the landmarks dance upon the page, never coming to rest in the same place twice. The Blood God's domain is the largest in the Realms of Chaos, and it's the Kingdom of Khorne, a kingdom of carnage, a land of constant battle and martial challenge, dotted with impossibly tall bronze fortresses, drowned in torrents of viscera and rivers of blood. There is no beauty here, just the steady drum beats of war, a blasted wasteland pockmarked by craters and arenas where great champions fight and die for Khorne's favor. The very fabric of his kingdom is tied to his mood, which ranges from simmering rage to apocalyptic fury, and when he screams, the kingdoms themselves quake. Bordering these Crimson Lands is the Dark Prince's realm, home of Slaanesh and the decadent host of Desire. It's the smallest corner of the Realms of Chaos because Slaanesh is the youngest of the Dark Gods, and his power is still overshadowed by his brothers. But within each of their psyches, there's a growing, gnawing kernel of truth, that because each of them embody excess in all of its forms, Slaanesh might one day eclipse them all in strength. Boob snakes. Her realm is caught in a never-ending cycle of pain and debauchery, a place where nature itself revolts against the unnatural beings that breed and die here, a kingdom of carnal pleasures and endless suffering. Her demonettes are obviously constantly at war with Khorne, as we talked about. Their rivalries it's a rather nasty one, and they use the Palace of Slaanesh and the Marcher Fortress as staging grounds for their assaults on the Wrathgate and the Forge of Souls. The realm of Nurgle is exactly as one might expect, a diseased, bloated, heaving corpse with putrid swamps and hellish gardens that stretch for thousands of miles, or only 15 feet, and anyone who attempts to cross the muck might get stuck and melted down for biological fuel, or will simply keep walking forever, never reaching their destination that appears close enough to touch, a common theme on the borders of Tzeentch's domain. But at the very heart of his moldering mansion, Nurgle indulges in his dark passion, mixing the diseases with which he blesses the mortal plane in a vast iron cauldron, testing their deadliness on Shalia, the Pox Fulcrum. And as his powers grow, so does the splendor of his garden. At their zenith, the undergrowth bursts through the boundaries between realms and leaps into Tzeentch's crystal labyrinth, cracking and decaying the borders and royally pissing the Liar Prince off, which inevitably leads to outright war, the war in heavens, which has kind of characterized the warp for pretty much its entire existence. They are always fighting, always invading, always trying to grab as much territory as possible before the pendulum swings back the other way. And so when these gardens bounce into Tzeentch's realm, the flamers and horrors are unleashed. They use their arcane magics to scour the garden in perpetual flame, and these battles can last anywhere from a few seconds to a few centuries, only ceasing when all is burned away and Nurgle begins expansion of his gardens anew. Now, Tzeentch's territory will perhaps be the most mind-blowing in the game to witness, marked by impossibly tall towers, crystal mazes from which there is no escape, crisscrossed by glittering pathways that reflect the collective emotion of humanity. A place that constantly grants hope, then snatches it away at the last moment, breaking dreams and shattering personalities with every step. That's only if the flamers don't burn your ass first. So when you're talking about their translation to Total War, I don't expect a truly massive campaign map within a campaign map here, because we already know the main campaign is going to be a ginormous. PC Gamer said it'll be almost twice the size of the Great Vortex map. There are clearly lots of ways CA could handle this, whether it be a handful of major regions bleeding into the Mortal Realms, the northernmost border, blending in from the Chaos Wastes, or as a portal to the Warp Gate that sends you into Dante's Inferno into its own separate thing. I don't think the Realms of Chaos will be anywhere near as massive as they appear in the lore, because even if the Forces of Order can access them, it's going to be in a very limited capacity, right? It's part of some endgame final quest battle type assault. Kislev and CATHAY are not going to be waltzing in on turn 25 and saying, hey guys, what's up? So it doesn't make a lot of sense to create a fully fleshed out, massive Realms of Chaos that only Chaos factions will have fully fledged access to. I mean, there's going to be two races that won't be interacting with it that much during their playthroughs. With the Chaos Wastes, sure, not with the Warp, not with the Realms of Chaos themselves. So what I think will happen here is there will maybe be like 5 or 6 important landmarks or fortresses in each realm. And once you conquer those lands, all of them, you're blessed with the opportunity to join or challenge Archaon, then make war on the soft realms of men. How that ties into Be'lakor and Chaos Undivided obviously isn't entirely clear yet, but there's certainly some implication that whoever wins in the Realms of Chaos and unites them, whoever destroys in that Thunderdome, will forge some kind of temporary alliance with him, and maybe, because he seems to be the driving narrative force behind Total War Warhammer 3, you'll get Be'lakor's blessings and his army to come join you. But Be'lakor only serves one entity, himself, so I'd be very wary of the things he says and does in your playthroughs, because a Tzeentchian betrayal is very much up his alley, and it would not surprise me in the slightest if he ends up being the true endgame threat. But I'm super stoked to finally see the Chaos Realms in all their glory. Whether they just end up being battle maps or a legit mini-campaign, they're going to be some of the craziest looking assets we've ever seen in this trilogy. And if Creative Assembly does them justice, they'll prove a fitting capstone for what's turning out to be a truly legendary combined campaign map. But let me know, what do you guys think about how the Lands of the Dark Gods could be implemented? What would your preference be on that front? And what could they mean for the future of Total War Warhammer 3? Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.